Good evening and welcome to a special Hearthstone half hour. I'm Hammy, this is FailCraft Casts, hope you're well and good, and it is Blizzcon, it's Friday night, and Blizzard have just announced the first Hearthstone expansion. It is Goblins versus Gnomes. It is going to be with us next month, so December 2014 this releases, and as highlighted by Lud in the chat, thank you very much Lud, it is going to be priced at the same price as expert packs at the moment, so you can buy into it the same way. If you start doing your quests and saving up for all of your Hearthstone goodness, you're going to be able to get these very, very soon. So what we're going to do is just review about 25 or so cards that are over. I think there's 120 in this expansion, and at the moment there are about 25 or so cards out there just on BlizzCon Go. We'll come back and review more cards as we go along, but without further ado, let's jump into the new cards and see what they do. So let's just overview Goblins versus Gnomes. It's got loads of fresh cards in, unique minions, new ways to play, and then basically you've got the Alliance and the Horde, the Goblins and the Gnomes, the Goblins for the Horde, the Gnomes for the Alliance, and loads of different strategies and a few more mechanics. So you have inventions, and you also have mechanical creations, and basically you have mechs, so there's new special weapons, special powers, and similar. So obviously the Gnomes, tinkerers and inventors, technological marvels and similar. Goblins love a good explosion and make golems and similar. So in terms of mechanics, you can get stuck into one or the other. Loads of cool cards. We're just going to go and take a look at some now. So without further ado, let's jump on in and take a look at what we have. So, okay, that's not the greatest start, but let's go to the cards. We're ready to roll. So first up, let's look at the Annoyatron. So it's a mech. We can see that it has a Taunt and Divine Shield and a 2-mana drop for 1 attack and 2 health. So that is actually a very interesting card indeed, and that is going to be really stopping some rush decks right in their tracks. Throw one of those down turn 2 and you're really going to be causing your opponents a few problems. So for an Annoyatron, 1 attack, 2 health, that's really going to be slowing people up. I can see that being dropped in quite a few decks. You know, for example, imagine if you were a zoo and you were playing against that, that could be slightly awkward. With a Taunt and Divine Shield, of course, you're going to have to attack through that to actually do damage and get rid of the shield before you can attack it, and even then it still has Taunt. Imagine if you drop that in a priest deck and you're doing things like Power Word, Shield, if you give it another 2 health and draw a card, that rapidly becomes a very irritating early game tank. Hence the badge, the Annoyatron, with its lovely little trumpets and smiley face and confetti. That will be really slowing people down. So a nice early game tank, a nice way of slowing up rush decks. I can see the Annoyatron being played in priest, and I can see it dropping even into zoos if a zoo wants to slow people down. Any deck that requires a bit more of a mid-game setup and has the ability to buff health on cards could do a lot worse than having an Annoyatron in their arsenal. Okie dokie, as we have a look through the Twitters, and I forget how to use screen region. Next up we have the Blingatron 3000, and on the Blingatron 3000 we have a battle cry, equip a random weapon for each player, pushing out the bling. 3 attack and 4 health, that's a fairly solid trading set of stats. You will be able to trade some minions off the table with that. 5 mana, makes it slightly expensive for the mid game, but with that kind of battle cry, a random weapon, well, if I had an acidic Swamp Ooze and I could destroy my opponent's weapon, and a random weapon, we'll see if that's any weapon in the game, excluding tokens, whether it's a similar, like the Web Spinner for beasts, is it a similar effect in that regard? We just don't know, but we can find out, and that would be a good one to ask Blizzard. But if it's random, a random weapon, I'm guessing maybe it can't be something like Tyrion Fordwing's Ashbringer, because that's actually technically a summon, whereas it could equip any weapon card that exists. So obviously the Web Spinner can get any card that exists in the game, but not any summon, like a token that gets summoned. So it depends whether Ashbringer, Tyrion Fordwing's Ashbringer, is a summon, or whether it's technically a weapon card. I'm imagining that'll be a weapon card, but we'll see. So grab yourself a weapon and then destroy your opponent's weapon. Could be some interesting combos with the Blingatron, but slightly weird card in terms of its attack and its weapon. It's quite situational with its ability, so there may be some interesting uses for that, but off the top of my head I'd have to think a bit more into those. Next up we've got a Bomb Lobber. Why not? Goblins do love throwing a few bombs around. Battle cry, deal 4 damage to a random enemy minion. Well, that's why it costs 5 mana. The 3/3 could do some interesting bits and bobs. 3/3 will let you trade with minions on the table in terms of health and attack. The battle cry is very, very strong. That will be softening things up, if not destroying them outright. However, because it's random, you probably want to play the bomb lobber when your opponent only has one minion on the table, and it's one that you particularly want to do 4 damage to, for example. So, interesting bomb lobber. Some good damage. However, is it going to do as much damage as you'd like to the card that you'd like? Well, that's going to depend on how you play it. Next up, we've got the Boombots. 1 mana, 1 attack and 1 health. All well and good so far. Death Rattle will deal 1 to 4 damage to a random enemy. So, very, very interesting in terms of random enemy. It could be any minion. I'm guessing because it's random enemy, it can also be the enemy hero. So, that looks interesting. In terms of the Death Rattle, you can use it to buff up things like Undertakers. Certainly in the early game, you could charge it into something, and again, if you have everything dead by 1 minion that you want to do 1 to 4 to, at least you can focus it slightly. Will be interesting to try and put some pressure on with Boombots. How would I use them? Well, in the early game, you can put some pressure down in the form of that with the Death Rattle. You can attack with it, and then the attack will take something else out as well. So not really too bad when it comes to looking, say, against aggro decks or similar. You can put some nice pressure on with that Boom Bot, and then the Death Rattle can always buff some of your own minions. If it does 4 damage, it might be a bit of overkill. It's a bit of a risk in the late game, just because of the 1 to 4 damage. You just don't know what it's going to do. So an interesting set of first cards there. Let's jump on to the second set. Next up we have a Cogmaster, and for a 1 mana, 1 attack and 2 health card, the Cogmaster may stay on the table a little bit, but you can see that they're trying to forge a new mech archetype with mechs and cards that support mechs or benefit from mechs. So he has +2 attack while you have a mech. If you're throwing down a cheap mech of some description, then you could be rushing with Cogmaster. Say you throw down a Boombot and then a Cogmaster, you have a 3/2 Cogmaster, 3 attack, 2 health, and then a Boombot who can do some clearance as well. So comboing the Cogmaster with the Boombot are very, very simple thought there, but that would be a good piece of pressure to do. And the more mechs, the nastier the Cogmaster gets. Do you play him with Priest? Do you buff his health? Do you then throw down more mechs? Do you get a really nasty early game Cogmaster mech rush? Could be possible. Next up we have Dr. Boom. I cannot remember the area name, but it's in Netherstorm, I think, in World of Warcraft. Area whatever. Dr. Boom is around there. Battlecry 7/7/7, a legendary nonetheless. So 7 mana, 7 attack, 7 health, with a Battlecry of summoning 2 1/1 Boombots. Warning bots may explode. I want to know if that warning bots may explode is flavor text, or if it's a literal they may just explode. So when you summon them, do they just randomly explode? That would be a very, very interesting one to see. So okie dokies. If you just summon them in and they may explode, then we'll have to see how that goes. But 2 1/1 Boombots certainly handy, and of course they'll both be mechs. They could buff a Cogmaster on the table if you were actually dropping one of those in the late game. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, so an interesting legendary. The Boombots, as we know, can do a bit of damage, but if they explode on entry to the table, then who knows what they will do. Next up we've got the Enhancer Meccano, 4 mana, 3 attack, 2 health, so slightly expensive mana cost wise for his base stats. Then let's go and look at his abilities. The Battlecry give your other minions Wind Fury, Taunt or Divine Shield at random. So Wind Fury, all of your minions with Wind Fury could be a very, very funny. Thrash asks, the Boombots are a summon, not an actual card you can play, or are they both? To be honest, Thrash, I'm not sure. They have a branding as mech, but yeah, I do wonder if they're a token to go with Dr. Boom. I thought, I was wondering if they were actually something you could play. So I don't know, Thrash, we'll have to check that as to whether the Boombots are an actual playable card or whether they're just a summon of Dr. Boom. So a random Wind Fury, a random Taunt, or a random Divine Shield. Well, none of those are bad. Particularly, I could see use of an Enhancer Meccano in a rush deck. If in a rush deck, any of your minions with Wind Fury, any of your minions with Taunt, or any of your minions with Divine Shield is actually brilliant. Hey, you could even play Enhancer Meccano with Blood Knight and similar. Could be interesting, but of course the random effect just means, are you going to have the luck that you actually want? I do forgive me for clicking to these things all the time. So situational could be interesting. There are some combos, but you're just going down to RNG, random number generation. Next up, we've got an Explosive Sheep. Death Rattle of dealing 2 damage to all minions. If that's not a summon, then think of this like an unstable ghoul. 2 damage to all, that's a great way, if it's not silenced, of just totally wiping out a side of the deck. Think of how much damage that will do to a zoo. If you've got unstable ghouls or similar, 2 damage to all minions, that is of course going to do damage to your minions as well. Let's not forget. So, could be a table clearer, could be an aggro deck counter. If it doesn't get silenced, will damage your own minions as well. Next up, we have Flame Cannon. 2 mana, deal 4 damage to a random enemy minion. Nice dangerous card there. And of course, random if you've only got 1 or 2 minions, or if your opponent's only got 1 minion on the table, then Flame Cannon is not random because you're only going to do damage to that minion. So, as with anything that does random damage to a random enemy minion, can you find a way, can you engineer a situation whereby Flame Cannon is a 2 mana 4 damage spell? If you can make that targeted, e.g. if you can reduce your opponent's minions so that they've only got 1 or 2 that you want to do damage to, then Flame Cannon becomes a great mana efficient damaging direct damage spell. So really handy stuff there. Even just throwing those down, not too bad, but of course if you're doing 4 damage to a 1 health minion, you're wasting mana, you're wasting the card. So situational, can you make it work? It's up to you in a deck. The Goblin Blast Mage. Battle Cry. 4 mana for 5 attack and 4 health, all's well and good on basic stats, it's pretty rounded and balanced. If you control a mech, deal 4 damage, randomly split among enemy characters. Goblins loving a bit of randomness. This is a very random expansion. Someone compared that to Snipe. Yeah, okay, I can see Black Cat where that's coming from on Flame Cannon. We'll come back to that in a sec. 4 damage randomly split among enemy characters. Well, if you control a mech, you'll get that. If you don't control a mech, you don't get that effect. So, again, iffy. I mean, you can see that a lot of these cards have got synergy and combos in between them. 4 damage randomly split among enemy characters. Again, if you're playing against a rush or an aggro deck, that could really be picking off lots of small health minions. But you're getting into the mid-game at 4 mana, 5 mana, so really a Goblin Blast Mage. Randomly split damage, it could soften them up, it might let you follow through with something like an Explosive Sheep for 2 damage to all minions or some such, but I think on the whole pretty situational. Mad Bomber, the big cousin of the big brother, the older relative of the Mad Bomber. Battle Cry of 6 damage, randomly split between all other characters. Why not? Exactly the big brother of the Mad Bomber. Instead of 3 damage, it's 6. The stats in itself are pretty solid, so it's like the Mad Bomber being 3 attack and 2 health. It's not a bad card, but could just cause all kinds of untold pain. So a Battle Cry of 6 damage between all other characters is very painful indeed. That could really disable your side of the game and really hurt your side of the table. So again, I think we'll see hilarity in that in Arena. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to pull into a good constructed strategy unless it's the only card you're putting on the deck. Next up, Mech Warper. Warps in mechs. 2/2/3, so a nice solid card in its own stacks, and your mechs cost 1 less, so that's going to let you bring the Mech Rush on if I want to be throwing down Boombots if they're an actual non-summon, Explosive Sheep, Enhancer Meccano. So it's kind of like the Sorcerer's Apprentice or that similar card in Mage, letting you play minions for 1 less mana. But apart from your mechs costing 1 less, increases your Mech Rush. The 2/2/3 is a fairly solid set of stats for an early minion anyway. Next up we have Mech Engineer Thermaplug. I believe he's Gnome Regan. And another legendary. 9 mana, 9 attack and 7 health, so slightly low health on that for a late game finisher. But whenever an enemy minion dies, summon a Leper Gnome. My goodness. And we know that Leper Gnomes, of course, 2 attack, 1 health. Death Rattle will do 2 damage to the enemy hero. So definitely Gnome Regan or a Gnome Regan. We shall see. So, good question. Why do the Goblin Blast Mage and Flame Cannon have slightly different colours? They look broadly the same. I don't know whether that's just my display or my stream as to how those are coming out. They look broadly the same on my monitor. Summoning loads of leper gnomes, if you can clear loads of enemy minions and you're summoning gnomes, there could be some nasty combos there whereby you give your opponent lots of small token minions against a rush if you can swarm down all of their minions and then summon a bunch of leper gnomes. It's like a Kel'Thuzad but with leper gnomes and needing to destroy your enemy's minions. So I think, can you find a way to abuse it whereby you fill your opponent's side of the table? Say for example your opponent played Onyxia, you strafed away all of their Onyxia 1/1 whelps. I don't know how many of your opponents will actually play Onyxia. You can see some uses for it. You also maybe things like the I want to say Illidan, but it's not. It'll come back to me. But yeah, when you're summoning demons and such like, or any small minions. So yeah, could be some uses for Mech Engineer, but how can you stuff your opponent's side of the table full of cards and then strafe those down very quick? Next up, we've got a Micro Machine. Yeah, it does actually look like a Micro Machine, one of the finest racing games ever made. But at the start of each turn, you gain 1 attack. You've got 2 mana for 1 attack, 2 health. You could just throw that in a priest deck and buff it. That could be a really good wombo combo card in terms of buffing its health so that it stays alive. Maybe put it behind tanks, getting 1 attack every turn. It's like the Shade of Naxxramas, but the Shade of Naxxramas has stealth. You could throw that in a rogue. No, stealth only drops, conceal only drops for 1 turn. Okay, so maybe drop it in priest or something that will let you buff health on the card, keep it alive for longer, and then it will scale as you scale throughout the game. So yeah, not a bad early game pressure aggro card, particularly good if you can buff its health up and keep it protected behind taunts or similar. Mimiron's Head is a legendary, interesting 5 mana, 4 attack, 5 health, solid enough stats in its own right. At the start of your turn, if you have at least 3 mechs, destroy them all and form VO7tron. Voltron. It's a boss in World of Warcraft, I think, Lud, if I recall correctly. So, if you have at least 3 mechs, you can form Voltron. I want to know what Voltron is and how dangerous he is. That could be quite interesting indeed. So we need to see what Voltron is before we can really judge this card fully, but I'm guessing Voltron is some kind of a big bad Beetleborg type boss. He'd be very, very interesting to check out indeed. So yeah, who knows, be he strong or be he nay, we'll find out, I'm sure, at some point soon. Okie dokie. Without further ado, let's move on to Piloted Shredder. A death rattle of summoning a random 2-cost minion, which is interesting. Lots of good 2-cost minions in the world, but a Piloted Shredder for 4 mana, 4 attack, 3 health. That's not a bad early game rush card, particularly if you're a rushy card, particularly if you're focusing on a mech style of play. Because you can get some of those other mech benefits that we've seen from the other cards. A death rattle, summoning a random 2-cost minion. Think of all the 2 costs there could be. You could be getting mechs, you could be getting really... There are some rubbish 2-cost minions as well, though. We'll be very, very frank about that. So we'll reserve judgment, but it goes well with the mech theme. Piloted Sky Golem, death rattle, summoning a random 4-cost minion. Well, we can see that this is the RNG expansion indeed. A random 4-cost minion, 6 attack, 4 health for 6 mana. Again, the health is low. A 4-cost minion, and again, loads of good 4-cost minions. It could help or hinder us. Most 4-cost minions that I can think of off the top of my head are fairly solid. You might get some things that are quite tanky rather than loads of attack. I'd have to go and have a look at the 4-cost minions. So again, how much do you believe in a coin flip and a dice roll in a random number generation? It could make or break your game, depending on what that 4-cost minion is. Next up we have a Recombobulator, as we move to the middle. 2 mana for 3 attack and 2 health. That fulfills the core stats of a very solid 2-drop. The Battlecry transforms a friendly minion into a random minion with the same cost. The question is, do you feel lucky, punk? It's so much RNG, it's absolutely mad. This will be a very fun expansion to play, but how tournament viable it will be, we'll have to get our creative thinking hats on when the cards are released and we can see a bit more and see if there are any ways we can get all of these random effects working together in a risk-free or a very low risk yet powerful way. The thing is with RNG, the more that you have, generally in card games you want a stable core to your deck that you can run and reliably know how it's going to play and work, which means that you can then work out how you can react and play against other decks. The more random effects you bring in, the harder it is to have a stable core deck, and you're relying more on luck than you are on the fixed element of control that you have in your strategy. So RNG, always interesting in that regard. Next up we've got Shrinkmeister. 2 mana, 3 attack, 2 health. Battlecry, give a minion -2 attack this turn, and as I believe Black Cat Hamlet said earlier, that is going to be great for priests with Shadowword Pain, Shadowword Death, that revolve around removing cards, and you can see that I believe that may well be a priest card due to its colouring. Anyway, it's not grey, it's got the priest coloured background, so that looks priesty, and yet priests are going to love that because it will bring a lot of people within range of their various Cabal Shadow Priests, their control cards. It brings people in range of stampeding Kodos as well, destroying a minion. Lots of effects in Hearthstone have an effect if there is low attack, so we will see how those go. It can bring cards that require a certain amount of attack into range, like the Stampeding Kodo, like the the Cabal Shadow Priest for the mind control, also Shadow of Pain and Shadow of Death. So good for priests. Interesting. That will see use in priest decks, I'm sure. Sneed's Old Shredder has a legendary, so 8 mana, 5 attack, 7 health, a bit more tanky, not really an attacking minion. A Death Rattle of summoning a random legendary. That most legendaries are okay, some of them could really ruin your day, like Lawwalker Cho. Anytime someone casts a spell, their opponent gets a copy of that spell, and similar. So Sneed's Old Shredder, again a really fun card, but a lot of risk in there. There's 120 cards, then remember these might be the fun ones they're releasing first before they focus on the esports ones. A very good point, Black Cat. So, do you want to summon a random legendary? Well, that could be very risky. Like I said, there's Lawwalker Chome, and there's some that are just not ideal. Some of them could really hinder your strategy in general. Some of them could totally win the game for you. Do you want to take that risk? There's Voltron. We can check him out in a sec. Spider Tank. I can't help but think that's a Watchdog reference. There seem to be lots of Spider Tanks turning up in games in 2014. 3 attack, 3 health. 3 attack and 4 health for 3 mana. That's a really solid early game card. I could see that easily being comboed with Sunfury Protectors as an early tanking card in a Mech Rush. You could use that to solidify your Mech Rush if you put some tanking cards around it. The stats will mean that it could come out turn 2 if you have a coin, and it could really start wrecking through early game decks. So really, really scary. For 2, we've got an Unstable Portal, adding a random minion to your hand, and it costs 3 less. Nice. I'm guessing Unstable Portal. That looks possibly a mage card. Looking at a mage card. Looks mage portal. So random minion to your hand. It just means you can play something, but if it's a random minion out of the whole game, then we just don't know what that's going to do. So very, very interesting. Upgraded Repair Bot. Battlecry giving a friendly mech 4 health, brilliant. If you're comboing priests and mechs and you're buffing your priest cards with the Dark Cultist, if you're buffing your mechs with upgraded Repair Bot, 5/5/5 will mean that card can actually trade some cards off the table before it dies as well, so it could be pretty dangerous in that regard too. Really, really handy that, and if you're going to play a mech-centered strategy, I can see that actually being quite solid. If you're going to play a mech deck, the stats are solid enough for its mana cost, and then upgrading the right mechs is really going to help you push forward in that mid-game. An early to mid-game, perhaps a mid-game winning or focusing mech deck could really do with that card. So that is viable with other mechs, absolutely. Pretty good. Oh, and then look at Voltron. Look at that. Now remember, we can only summon Voltron by playing Mimiron's Head when we have at least 3 mechs. We need to play mechs, play Mimiron's Head, and then summon Voltron. So you need 3 mechs, destroy them with a 5-drop, and then you get Voltron. So Voltron you can't just play for 8 mana. Charge, you can attack straight away. Mega Wind Fury can attack 4 times in a turn, and as Thrash says, 16 damage. Yes, with Rockbiter as well. So with Rockbiter that would add 3 attack. So that would change him from 16 to 7, 14, 21, 28. So yeah, vicious. If you can get a Voltron on the table, it's kind of like Thaddeus. You can Mega Wind Fury 4 attacks in 1 turn is a massive win if there's no tank in the way. But remember that Voltron requires a lot of setup. You need to do a lot of stuff to even get him on the table in the first place. I do apologise, I'm just getting some other bits and bobs out the way on the screen so we can get ourselves going. Cool. So there's Voltron. Voltron could be very nasty. We're just going to have to see what we can do with that. And then finally, card-wise, last but not least, we have Velen's Chosen. So what is Velen's Chosen? Give a minion +2/+4 and spell damage +1. I'm guessing that's a priest card. It looks pretty priesty in the scheme of things. give a minion 2/4. Well, you get 2 attack and 4 health. Spell damage at +1 will help you. For 3 mana, it's not too bad, but really for 3 mana, you're looking at those main stats rather than the spell damage, unless you're following it up with some real nasty spells. Again, not 100. That looks priesty as a priest card, but then again, some of the others might have been as well. So there are more cards kicking around online. We'll try and have a look at them when we can get through the translation barrier. There's been a whole bunch released, but they're in French. So thank you so much for tuning into that very quick review of Goblins versus Gnomes, and the first cards that have been released as of BlizzCon 2014 Friday, that being today, the 7th of November. Absolutely awesome. Thanks very much for tuning in. We will be doing more card quick analysis and examinations as they go live over the weekend and as they go live over the coming weeks. If you're new to tuning in and you're watching live, please do check us out at youtube.com/FailCraft Casts. We do the half-stone, half-hour, 4 or 5 nights a week. We stream live on Twitch at the times in the bottom left, and you can always check us out on at FailCraft Casts on Twitter. We'll tweet when we're going to be going live. But youtube.com/FailCraft Casts, we do Heroes of the Storm. We'd love to start covering Overwatch and do a bunch of other games too, but primarily Hearthstone, so go check it out. If you're on YouTube, twitch.tv/FailCraft Casts, we go live on the schedule I just mentioned. Come there, you can follow us for free, and then you can get an email or check us on Twitter when we're going to go live. And last but not least, the website is failcraft.org, and on that site you can see not only articles, but also some news and things that don't go quite so well in a video, so deck lists, articles, discussions, etc. Thanks very much for tuning in. We'll be doing more later, so take it easy.